Hello there everyone. Today I wanted to go over an example of how to take GIS-based data and use it in Excel. Again, mostly because I've gotten a few emails and requests about this, and there's a few different ways to do it and go about it. To me, I just want to kind of display another way, another data set, how you could do this. Instead of headaches that you might incur, I'm doing this kind of live. I haven't gone through it yet, but I expect I'll probably encounter some errors along the way. That's the basic troubleshooting. Anytime you're trying to do something in any program, be it Excel, ArcGIS, R, Python, whatever you want to get into, you're going to run into issues. But what you see in front of you is a general outline of Chattanooga, Tennessee, where some colleagues and I are working on a Gun Crime Intelligence Center project with the police department. So you can see in kind of the table of contents for this program, ArcGIS Pro, we have some homicide ag assault, some NIBIN, which is your ballistic information, and along with our block groups and tracks. Obviously, you probably don't recognize these descriptions or data labels. These are how you download it straight from the Census. They do have a rhyme and reason to them. It's not always the greatest, but as you can see below, I pulled them out, clipped them, renamed them. So you can see what it looks like for block groups in Chattanooga once that kicks on. And typically you have block groups within tracks, so it divides it. Most of the time it increases your sample size or neighborhoods by threefold. Around that, keep in mind that's kind of just an estimate for it. With that, usually not everyone has access to ArcGIS or an Esri-based product. So with that, I'm going to go over a data set that I've created for a student to work on. Mind you, I did a minimal effort in this data set. I just did the geocoding and FIPS unique ID placement for it. But this is what it looks like in Excel. So we have a lat and long, which is always helpful if you want to display just in Excel. But the key part is our state, county, tract, and block group ID, which gives us our geo ID, which is a unique identifier at the block group level. I prefer to do it at the block group because if you want to move up and just do it at a tract level, you already have that information within it. You just need to create a unique geo ID FIPS code just for the tract level. So you'd end up concatenating and combining our state, county, and then FIPS into one cell. Similar to this, it would just be missing the 2 at the end. For this one, the 4, 3, and so on and so on. So it allows you to do a lot in Excel, and these are all just incident based, so it's not aggregated at this point. We'll go through that here in a second. One part I do want to show you is if you ever see a file that has the area, and then typically that's the area of the neighborhood itself. When you clip to a city administrative boundary, you're not always going to have the same area. And I say that when I pull this aside, these edges here are admin boundaries. They're not always going to line up with our neighborhoods or block groups itself. So if I turn on one of the large ones, again, I might have already kicked them out. Let's see. There we go. This is the entire set. You can see they don't always line up with our same boundaries itself. So you're going to have parts of, so you're going to have different areas. Usually the first thing I do is when I'm exporting out a smaller tract or block group is to see how much of the area remains the same, like how much are we missing. You can see there's variation just at the top here, and we can continue to scroll down. Some remain the same. So the internal ones are typically the ones that are always fine. It's the one along the edges of the city admin boundaries. They're going to have a different area. Typically what you see researchers do is proportion out some of our socio-demographic measures based on that. Some might not even have population. I've dealt with that just from a commercial neighborhood standpoint. But then you can always link that data back in with the FIPS or GeoID with our census information or ACS data. So it's pretty common. I will say one thing we ran into, and was pointed out by my colleague Rick, that the rebounding of some of our census block groups and tracks, primarily block groups, they split some. So if the population grows too much, typically you see a subdivision of that. So depending on the year, you could see a change in those number of units at different levels, which is good and bad. You get more units and variation. But depending on how far back you're going and linking data to, it can become a headache for that. That aside, this is kind of what it looks like in a normal GIS-based program. If I turn these on, these are our point data that has the lat and long that I just took out into a DBF table form, saved it as an XLSX file, and then now we can use it in Excel. All I did was take the unique identifier from our block group file. So if I open this attribute table here, give it a second, my computer is being rather slow today with the other stuff I've been working on. Probably should have done a restart before it. But these are the pains of working with larger programs itself. But here we go. Let that load. And this, keep in mind, this is the one that's already clipped for Chattanooga, so it's not all block groups in Tennessee. I bring that up because in Excel, I'll show you a specific reason why. So you can see here, these are the main areas that I'm concerned with, and these are the variables that I want to attach to each one of these point files, be it the NIBIN, be it the homicide ag assaults with firearms. That's what I want to attach to those points, so I know where each point is located within a specific neighborhood. So I know the county, which is most of the time going to be the same. Some of our larger cities have multiple counties come through them. It's a pain, but it does happen fairly often. Then our tract and block group, which gives us our unique GeoID, which allows us to merge in most commonly our ACS, American Community Survey, and social census data itself. But that's what I attached to the points and gave me the data set now that I'll pull back over. You see in front of you. So the key part here is, keep in mind these are all individual events. So just over, 1,100 of them. With that, what's needed, and you can see some I left in that actually were geocoded outside or couldn't be geocoded based on incomplete or unknown addresses, which is fine. I leave those in just so I know what the original counts are. But let's go through how to aggregate these. So the big part is, if I want to display these by even the neighborhood census tract or block group, I need to aggregate these and get a count per neighborhood. This also allows me to know the count per, say, a specific neighborhood, and allows me, even in ArcGIS, or Excel at this point, if I wanted to, and I already had downloaded the census data from the census website, I could link it and merge it in based on the GeoID. You can do a VLOOKUP, you can do a number of different tasks, and there's videos on that. But I could essentially make a larger data set based on this GeoID. It's my unique identifier that allows all that to be merged in. With that, I want to just aggregate my counts based on that. So again, typically my quick way to do this would be to insert a pivot table. So for those of you who are not familiar with some of my videos and how I do this, I highlight the top row of just the variable names, hold down Control and Shift, and then just hit the down arrow. It ends up highlighting and grabbing the data set by itself. I'm going to go to Insert and Pivot Table. Going to hit OK. It's just going to add it to a brand new sheet. And now what I'm interested in is the counts by GeoID. So if I put this as a GeoID, each one here is unique. And at this point, I don't really need columns. I just want a count. So if you keep in mind, everything had, for the most part, an XY, unless it was unknown. And you'll see the NAs here at the bottom, which signifies that those were unknown. Those were ungeocoded, unmatched addresses or events themselves. So with that, I'm just going to pull the X value down here. And you can see it automatically changed it to count. If you need to change that, or if it wasn't count, if you go into the value setting fields, you see here that you can do a sum, count, average, max, min. You can do quite a bit with it. Primarily what I use it for, unless I'm getting into some other types of analysis, is a count. But with that, since I now have my unique identifier, my GeoID, and I have the count of incidents per neighborhood, I'm going to go ahead and copy this table. Keep in mind this is a live pivot table, so that's why I'm copying out of this. So Control C, going to create a new sheet and just Control V, so paste it into it. Recognize it as a unique ID, so I'm just going to say GeoID here. And then I have my count incidents. This was at block group, so if you see the 1313 at the end of these are specific block groups itself. So if I got rid of the block group and it was just the 400 here, this would be within the same tract itself. So that gives you an idea of, hey, if I didn't want to use that small of unit of analysis and I want to go up to tract level, this would be actually 88. This one here would be 4. So it's dividing these units, which allows you to pick up more variation within the data itself. Again, you can do tract level within this data set. Just do a concatenate, and if you're not familiar with the concatenate function, it's truly just equals concatenate. And what I would want to bring together here is the state, the county, and the tract. Close it off. I don't want any spaces in it. If I hit enter, I now have the tract unique ID. And if you're familiar with Excel, since I put in a formula here, and if I hit and double click this green little box, it's going to autofill all the way down for me. The key part is, if you're wanting to use this, if you click any of these cells and look up here, it still has the formula in it, which is good and bad. You can come back and see what you did, so if you need to make changes, if there is an error, you can see where that is. If you know what's correct, I always recommend changing it to the actual values, because if you ever copy and paste it again or somewhere else, it doesn't always read it correctly. So when you go into copy and paste, it gives you different options. But right now, I just want the values. So I was happy with what it was, and now we have the tract over there. Again, I'm going to go forward with the block group. Just going to label this one down here, block group. And we're good to go. And I forgot I had caps lock on. There we go. So with that, we have our GeoID, we have our count of incidents. Now I might be interested in seeing what this looks like actually in Chattanooga. What most people don't believe and kind of realize is you can show this in Excel. The key part is here is you're going to import a unique external shapefile. With that, what typically becomes the big issue from those of you who have like more of a geospatial GIS background, it cannot be projected, so you need it in WGS, and that's kind of the main issue when you try to bring in or open a shapefile that you've already been working with. You need WGS versus a projected one. With that, if you download straight from the Census or Tigerline files, that comes in WGS files. So you can see here the tracked ones are truly still that way. The block group ones are just in a subfolder here, and I can open these up, and the original ones are in WGS, and that's what I'm going to do. It's going to pull in the entire state, but I only have data on a subset of those neighborhoods, which is going to display that way. So again, I'm just going to highlight my specific data set here, go to Insert, and you have options here, and this is where you might need to update your Excel to one of the more recent versions. For us at U of A, we can go through the campus and get that for us. So you have maps, but I want to use a 3D map itself. I want to open and give this a second. Typically this takes the longest part no matter what I do in Excel, no matter what's open, because it's actually opening the bean maps that it's going to attach the data to. So give this a second. I'm going to hit pause. Alright, that only took about another minute or two. But the issue here is when we bring in, we're not looking at the XY data, so we're not showing just the lat and long. We need to connect our data to something. It doesn't have a location field at this point. I'm just changing a couple things so it's easier for me. Flat map is just aesthetically what I prefer for this. But you can see here, we want a custom region. This is where we need to import our specific shapefile that is designated for our custom region. It has the information in it, so we need to just import based on a file we have. With that, I'm going to direct it to my Chattanooga folder and pull that specific one, and that's in Sam's thesis. Again, it brings in different shapefiles, but these aren't the ones that I need. Even the clipped one here is in a projected coordinate system versus the WGS. If I go into the original one and I just know how it's labeled, we're good to go here. So if I hit open, keep in mind it's going to probably take a few moments because this is for the entire state of Tennessee. The data I have is specific for Chattanooga, but I still need that information. So I want the GeoID, hit import, and now I want to add a field, the GeoID, and that's going to match our custom region. And as I zoom in, you can tell it auto fit it for us, and here we go. Again, it brings it in as just the points. Imagine centroids to, or the central part of a polygon, that's what it's attaching it to. If we come up to our data part up here and we want to visualize it, we can change it to region, which it knows the boundaries of the file itself. And now we can see the neighborhoods in Chattanooga. These are our block groups, but now we can add a value to this. So we have our count of Nibin, gun homicide, ag assault. And we can see based on this, and keep in mind it's not the best in terms of how it looks. You can mess with the layering options in terms of transparency, color scale, everything with that. So if we go darker, since it is red and everything with that, the color scale, which becomes a bit more difficult. But what you also see down here is it's only showing these specific values where we have data. You can mess with that, the data card and everything with that. But it gives you some, to me, some cool options to look at this specific data set itself that you might not have been used to before. Let me see if it's that's where I have to change it. For those of you who want to use this kind of as a display map and anything else, it says layer 1 down here. If you actually want to show what it is or change it, this could be your legend or whatever you want to call it at this point, but you can change the name up here, which would then change it down here. Pretty cool to have that ability within Excel to do some of that minor cosmetics kind of final map production, but it gives you an idea of where a lot of gun crime for us in Chattanooga is occurring. Here, if I want to, let's just pick a neighborhood. So you can see the unique ID that counts per that specific neighborhood. And if I zoom in, this is probably the one that would have joined with. Nope. So that's 4001, 4003. So these two are probably they're in the same tract. So together, these would have 88 together. They're subdivided into smaller ones. But the cool part is you can actually zoom in and see from a bean standpoint. This is where it's a little different than some of our Google Earth. The areas, and if I turn on map labels, there we go, you can see the streets and everything within it to see what's going on. Keep in mind, some of them might not have actual gun, knife, and ag assault homicide instances occur in them. It is a violent crime, obviously, and it's only for a couple years. It's feasible that certain neighborhoods do not have one in a year, 2 year, 3 year kind of framework. But it's always when you see gaps similar to this area, if you were to zoom in, it's the airport, which most likely means these type of data are going to be reported by another agency based on it being an airport, similar to some university or most universities have their own police department. That would be labeled and submitted differently as well. So keep in mind, it's always good to go through and see if you have gaps in some of your neighborhoods, if it's actually just zeros or what's going on with it itself. But yeah. Here we go with this way to just display most commonly used data that has a unique ID, that has a geo ID, that's spatial. In a sense, you're doing census, you're pulling census information, you're examining some type of outcome at a neighborhood or community level, but you don't have a GIS background. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the day. Excel has some pretty cool, intuitive, built-in ways to view your data, and I think that's the important part, that if you're going to be looking at community-based data and do a community-based project, you need to visualize the data to see what's going on. We oftentimes see, and it's been shown time and time again, crime isn't random in space, and oftentimes clusters within certain parts of neighborhoods, which means, as you can see here, some of our hot areas are based on that right there. These are just counts, they're not rates or anything with that. You can make rates based on the information you bring in from the Census or ACS. These are simply just counts of NIBIN, ag assault, homicide, data itself. This one, ag assault, homicide, I keep saying NIBIN because I did that too. But it's an easy way to view your data. And up here, and if you're not familiar with the themes of it, you can change them to, if you like the dark scale, want to change it up some, grayscale. But with that, you have limited flexibility with what you can do. But again, it's still a valuable skill set to have. Another one that you might like to see is just the height is based on the count itself, so you can see a bit what it looks like around the city, but you don't have the boundaries of the city itself. And if you're familiar with it, you can create a tour video if you wanted to circle around. I've done some of these before just to show what it looks like. Nothing too crazy, but it does allow you to circle around from a video standpoint or a presentation. It shows the variation. So I've done this with a lot of Little Rock data, but again, feel free to do what you like. It just zooms out, and if you want to zoom into certain areas, you can move it around, or if I hit escape there and come back out, if I go into scene options and I want to have just a circle effect, I'm going to increase this to just 30 seconds because I know how long it typically takes. I'm going to go faster, and it's not going to probably surround everything in the city, but we'll have a good estimate of what this looks like. So if I change the angle, zoom in a bit more, there we go. And now I hit play. Just by adding those scene options, then hitting play, you can get an idea, a nice visual of violent crime in Chattanooga for those 3 years and where it's located. Again, these are bars based on the centroid or the center point of our polygons or neighborhood block groups. You could do the same thing when it's the visual area of the block group boundaries with the different scale of how many crimes there were based on how dark or how red that cell was, the shading value of it. You can see there 30 seconds at the fastest speed got me about halfway around, but at least it shows the variation from both sides so you're not missing anything there. With that, I wanted to do another video just kind of going through how to take traditionally GIS, ArcGIS data into Excel and how to aggregate it up, visualize it at the neighborhood level, and do some cool stuff with it. There's a lot more you can do it than I showed there. Again, that was block group. You can still do tracked based on the ID that you found. You would just have to go to the Census website, and I'll link to it in the YouTube upload of where to pull this information from. It's not difficult if you're just wanting to do that and visualize the data, you're fine. If you're wanting to do more advanced analysis descriptions with the spatial data, that's where some background and another program, be it R, Python, ArcGIS, QGIS, those help you quite a bit. If there's questions with those, let me know. I can only do so much, but I have no problem making other videos with it. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. If not, take care.